Thousands of years ago, a human looked into the eyes of a creature that weighed 6 tons, had tusks the height of 2 grown men, and could crush him with a single step. We did not merely survive beside mammoths. We hunted them, ate their meat, built houses from their bones, and then wiped them from the face of the earth. But now, thousands of years later, humanity wants to bring them back to life. Why? And will we repeat the same mistake? Mammoths are extinct mammals, close relatives of modern elephants. They appeared about 5 million years ago and survived until the end of the Ice Age. The most famous species, the woolly mammoth, was adapted to life in cold conditions. These animals became a symbol of the Paleolithic era, living alongside ancient people and playing an important role in their survival. Mammoths belonged to the genus Mammoths and were part of the elephant family. They evolved in Africa, from where they spread to Europe, Asia, and North America. Different mammoth species lived in different geological periods. They were an important part of the Ice Age ecosystem, feeding on grasses, mosses, and shrubs, and their movements influenced vegetation. For ancient humans, mammoths were a source of meat, hides, bones, and tusks. Tusks were made into tools, weapons, and parts of dwellings. Mammoths were depicted in cave paintings. These are among the first examples of symbolic thinking. Some researchers believe that mammoths may have been objects of worship or symbols of strength. The last mammoths survived until the 2nd millennium BC on Wrangel Island. They existed in parallel with the first civilizations of the Near East. Their disappearance is linked to climate change and human hunting. Interest in mammoths remains today. They remind us how closely nature and humans are connected. Woolly mammoths are the most famous and well-studied species of ancient elephants. They were adapted to the harsh climate of the Ice Age and lived in the cold regions of Eurasia and North America. These animals were distinguished by a massive body, long, curved tusks, thick fur, and a characteristic hump on the back, a fat reserve that helped them survive the winter. The average height of an adult male was about 3.5 meters at the shoulder, with a weight of up to 5 or 6 tons. Females were smaller and calves were born covered with sparse hair that quickly changed to dense fur. Mammoths had a double coat, a dense underfur and long outer hairs up to 90 centimeters long, protecting them from cold and wind. The tusks are one of the most recognizable features of the woolly mammoth. They reached more than 4 meters in length and weighed up to 100 kilograms each. These tusks were used for defense, battles between males, clearing snow, and possibly for ritual purposes during the mating season. The mammoth's head was large, with a high forehead and a strong skull. The ears were short, the tail shortened to minimize heat loss. Massive legs and wide foot pads allowed stable movement over snow and mud. Grinding teeth worked like millstones. They crushed tough vegetation. During its life, the animal replaced up to 6 sets of such teeth. The evolution of the woolly mammoth followed the path of adaptation to cold. Their ancestors were larger and lived in a warmer climate. But as it cooled, they became smaller and acquired warm fur. The woolly mammoth became the most adapted species of the genus Mammoths. Other mammoth species, for example the steppe and Columbian, had their own features. The steppe mammoth was taller and heavier, living in a more temperate climate. The Columbian lived in the southern part of North America and was less covered with fur. But it was the woolly mammoth that became the symbol of the Ice Age thanks to its adaptation to northern conditions. Ideas about the appearance of these animals are confirmed by archaeological finds. Permafrost has preserved not only bones, but whole frozen carcasses with fur, skin, and even stomach contents. Thanks to these finds, scientists can accurately reconstruct the external appearance of mammoths. This is a unique case when a prehistoric animal can be studied in such detail, almost like a modern one. Mammoths were widespread across the northern hemisphere. Their range covered the territory from Western Europe to eastern Siberia, and from the Arctic to the southern regions of North America. Especially extensive was the so-called Mammoth Steppe, a vast tundra steppe zone that stretched across Eurasia and Beringia, now the submerged territory between Chukotka and Alaska. Woolly mammoths lived in the cold and dry conditions of northern Eurasia and North America. They avoided dense forests and swamps, preferring open spaces where they could move freely and find food. These areas included modern Siberia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Northern Europe, as well as Alaska and Canada. Thanks to their adaptation to the cold climate, woolly mammoths survived the harshest glacial periods. The Columbian mammoth lived farther south, in the warmer latitudes of North America, including the territory of today's USA and Mexico. It was larger than the woolly and less covered with fur. The steppe mammoth, the ancestor of the woolly, inhabited more temperate zones of Eurasia in an earlier period. The period of mammoth habitation covers the late Pliocene, Pleistocene, and part of the Holocene. They experienced multiple climate changes, glaciations and interglacials. During cold spells, mammoths expanded their range southward, and with warming, they returned north. Such seasonal or long-term movement allowed them to survive for tens of thousands of years. However, by the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, the climate changed sharply. Open steppes began to be overgrown with forests, and the mammoth range shrank. The last populations survived on isolated areas, for example on Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean, where mammoths persisted until about the 2nd millennium BC. Thus, mammoths were among the most widespread mammals of their time, but were completely dependent on climate and vegetation. Their extinction began when their familiar landscape disappeared, and this played a key role in their demise. The diet of mammoths depended on climate and season, but overall they were herbivores adapted to eating coarse and tough vegetation. Their food base consisted of grasses, sedges, mosses, lichens, shrubs, and young tree shoots. In winter, the diet became poorer. Mammoths switched to tree bark, frozen branches, and remnants of dry grass, sometimes digging plants out from under the snow with their tusks. Scientists learned the composition of the diet by analyzing the stomach contents of frozen mammoths, as well as microscopic plant traces preserved on their teeth. These teeth were wide, flat, with many parallel plates. They worked like millstones, efficiently grinding tough fodder. During its life, a mammoth replaced several sets of such teeth, which allowed it to feed even in old age. Mammoths spent most of the day feeding, about 16 to 18 hours. To maintain body mass, they needed to eat up to 200 kilograms of food per day. This made them not only large consumers, but also important participants in ecosystems. Grazing mammoths actively affected the vegetation cover, trampling, browsing, fertilizing the soil, and by this helped maintain the tundra steppe landscape. It was precisely the activity of mammoths that helped keep open spaces and prevented forests from overgrowing. Recent studies have shown that after their disappearance, a rapid change of vegetation began, and with it climate change and accelerated permafrost thawing. Thus, the feeding of mammoths is inseparably linked with their habitat. They were not just herbivorous animals, but key ecosystem engineers of their time. Their way of life shaped the landscape of the Ice Age for millennia. The disappearance of mammoths was the result of a combination of several factors. The main ones were climate change, reduction of the food base, and hunting by humans. These causes acted simultaneously, reinforcing each other. With the end of the Ice Age about 12,000 years ago, the climate became warmer and wetter. Glaciers retreated, steppe zones shrank, and forests and swamps appeared in their place. This sharply reduced the amount of suitable pasture. Mammoths lost access to their usual food and suffered from overheating. At the same time, the pressure from humans increased. Paleolithic hunters became more organized and skillful. The use of group hunting, traps, and coordination gave them an advantage. Mammoths became not just a random prey, but an important object of hunting. In addition, mammoths reproduced slowly, like modern elephants. A female carried a calf for almost 2 years and gave birth to one baby every 4 to 6 years. With high mortality and rare reproduction, the population did not have time to recover. Some mammoth populations survived in northern Eurasia and North America, as well as on isolated islands. However, limited resources, inbreeding, diseases, and unstable climatic conditions led to their complete extinction. Thus, mammoths did not disappear instantly, but as a result of gradual pressure from nature and humans. Their fate shows how fragile even the strongest species can be if its habitat changes too quickly. People did not hunt mammoths alone. It was a group, complex and dangerous task. Dozens of people took part. First, they watched the herd looking for weak or young individuals. Then they drove the prey into a trap. a pit, a swamp, or a ravine. They often used barriers of stones and wood, shouted, screamed, waved torches. The main task was to frighten and direct the animal to a place where it lost balance. There they finished it off with spears and stones. The meat of a mammoth could feed a group of 20 to 30 people for weeks. Hides were used as shelters, bones in construction, tusks for weapons and ornaments. In northern regions, tusks were even used to build dwellings covered with hides. Such hunting required knowledge, coordination, and transfer of experience. This developed social structures and communication in tribes. Mammoths became an important part not only of survival, but also of human development as a species. Mammoths were not only food, but also part of spiritual life. Their images are found in caves of France, Spain, Russia. Cave paintings are dated to 30 to 10,000 years ago. They show hunting scenes, animal outlines, symbolic signs. Mammoths became totems, symbols of strength, ancestral memory, protection. Their tusks were decorated with carvings. Amulets were made from bones. In some burials, mammoth bones are found together with human bodies, which indicates a special attitude. In the myths of some peoples, mammoths appeared as giants living underground. Discovered bones often caused amazement, generated legends. Even in antiquity, they were thought to be the remains of ancient monsters or giants. The most famous finds are frozen mammoths. Thanks to permafrost, they have been preserved with skin, fur, internal organs. Such specimens allow scientists to study DNA, diet, and diseases of the animals. Mammoth tusks are a valuable material. They are mined in Siberia and Alaska. Carving on tusk is an ancient art that still exists. Trade in tusks took place back in the Bronze Age and continues today. Excavations of camps, hearths, workshops give an idea of the role of mammoths in human life. Research confirms, without mammoths, the culture of the late Paleolithic would have looked different. In the 21st century, scientists seriously spoke about the possibility of reviving the mammoth. From frozen carcasses, it was possible to extract suitable sections of DNA. Cloning projects are being conducted in Russia, Japan, South Korea, and the USA. The goal is to insert mammoth genes into an elephant cell to create a hybrid. This is difficult. A mammoth is not just an elephant with fur. It is necessary to recreate many traits: metabolism, fur, fat layer, behavior. Critics talk about risks. Where will such animals live? How to adapt them to the modern climate? But supporters are sure reviving the mammoth will help restore the tundra steppe, slow permafrost thawing, and give a lesson on how to treat disappearing species. Projects such as Revive and Restore and research at Harvard are gradually bringing the goal closer. The mammoth may become the first species that humans bring back from extinction, not for the circus, but for science and ecology. So ends the story of the mammoths, from the glacial tundra to modern laboratories. But interest in them does not fade. Mammoths remain a symbol of the past, of memory, and of hope for the future. Mammoths were not just gigantic animals of the Ice Age. They became part of nature, culture, and human history. From hunting and myths to scientific excavations and cloning attempts, their trace has not disappeared. The story of the mammoths reminds us how closely species survival, climate change, and human actions are connected. It is a lesson not only about the past, but also about our future.